Hello, you are listening to Maghrib in Past and Present podcasts, a space dedicated to history, art, culture, politics, sociology, anthropology, and many other subjects. This episode was recorded on September 30th, 2019 at the Tangier American Legation Institute for Moroccan Studies. In this podcast, we welcome Dr. James Miller, Professor Emeritus from Clemson University, who discusses the joint Moroccan-American Archaeological project at the site of ancient Sijilmasa and the publication of the book he co-authored with Ronald Messier, The Last Civilized Place, Sijilmasa and its Saharan Destiny.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in Tangier at the American Legation with John Davison. I always like to come to Tangier. It's where not only the continents meet, but people who are very interesting come here. And the American Legation is certainly the center of a lot of intellectual and, social interest, and has a deep history in itself. But John, I think you've invited me here today to talk about Sijilmasa.
I have, but thank you and welcome back. It's I know Tangier is almost like a third home for you in Morocco, but obviously one of your original homes was Sijilmasa.
Well, yes, Sijilmasa is a place deep in history, and where something we have called the Moroccan-American project at Sijilmasa, which we've acronymed into MAPS, began in 1988 and continued for a decade, and in many ways continues still today, an archaeological excavation of the medieval caravan site that was Sijilmasa.
And what exactly was Sijilmasa?
Well, Sijilmasa is a lot of things. It's, I would say first it's a medieval caravan center. If we were to find it in a textbook or an index, it might be there. It's a city. It was along the capital of the Oasis district, Morocco's largest single oasis, called the Tafilelt. And it was for a long time, before modern times, really its own place in the world. And by that I mean it was a kingdom under a dynasty that prevailed, with periods that broke the continuity of that history, but was regrouped in the first, what I would call the first period of Sijilmasa. Sijilmasa was the first city founded by people who came from the east who were Muslims in Morocco.
Really?
Yes, 757, and as it happens, this is the 1,300th anniversary year of Sijilmasa.
That's excellent.
In the Islamic calendar, this is 1,300 years of the life of that city.
And who were those people who came?
Well, they were people who eventually founded a dynasty here. They first influenced the local people by bringing them the message of Islam. And this was a message that was in the terminology of Arabic and Islam today, sometimes misunderstood, but these were what we call in English the Kharijites, Khawarij in Arabic. And they came from Mesopotamia, today's Iraq. And they were, as many early Arabic manuscripts tell us, they were chased down and hunted, murdered in the east. They spread far and wide. They spread to the east to Persia, and they came in waves across northern Africa, from Egypt to Morocco, and they founded settlements largely, but not exclusively, on the edge of the desert. And Sijilmasa emerged as probably the greatest of these. They established cities throughout the countries we call today Algeria and Morocco. And this is before modern.
And these were new cities that they built.
That is correct. Yeah. And Sijilmasa is a very fortunate location. It's on the river Ziz, and the river also Ris. and where they nearly converge. And that's the kind of work that actually the kind of geographic situation that brought me into the project as a geographer in an archaeological project that had 6 seasons, full seasons of digging between 1988 and 1998. The project was initiated by the historian Ronald Messier, professor at Middle Tennessee State University, who had been trained in numismatics at Michigan, the University of Michigan, and whose interest in coinage in the medieval period led him to question, where did these Almoravid dinars come from? What was the mint? Where was Sijilmasa? Did it really exist? And so Ron came in 1987 on a prospection mission that led to a formal agreement between Middle Tennessee State University and the Ministry of Culture. And we proceeded with archaeological excavations hand in hand with the Institut National Supérieur de l'Archéologie et du Patrimoine, today known as INSAP, under the aegis of the Ministry of Culture. And we had, in these 6 seasons of digging, we had teams of archaeologists from both Morocco and the United States, and always a good number of Moroccan archaeology students. So Sijilmasa was in a way a kind of laboratory for those 10 years, and many of our colleagues today who are professors of archaeology and history were formed at the site at Sijilmasa, and that's something we're quite proud of.
You said that it was a myth almost. What actually was there when you first started the digs?
Well, there had been prospection. There had been prospection in the 1920s by French archaeologists and others who were interested in the site. The site was, in effect, vague and mysterious to most people. Everyone in Morocco knows the word Sijilmasa, but most people do not know where it is and if there's anything still there and so on. And so Ron went to the site, and this is back in the mid-'80s, and then, as I mentioned, the dig proceeded with the first full season in 1988, and I visited the site when they were working in 1988. But to answer your questions, it did have a kind of myth-like status, and we have often called it a kind of El Dorado that has led to the interest that we have, and others. And of course, we found the place quite real. It's a vast site near and adjacent to the modern town of Rissani. What was of interest in Sijilmasa? Why was it important? Well, it was the organizer of the caravan trade across the Sahara for hundreds of years. And it was the organizer and conductor of the trade in gold. Gold from ancient Ghana. Where was ancient Ghana? We don't quite know, but we think in the Niger River Basin, perhaps in southeastern Mauritania. There's wonderful descriptions of ancient Ghana by the writer El Bekri, who is a source of great information for us, who died in Almeria in 1055 AD. So, you know, the work we did with the American archaeologists, historians, people who analyze things like pollen and bones and all of these interesting things that you find in the ground. People here in Morocco who were students of archaeology and professional archaeologists led to an astounding kind of interplay among the disciplines to explore this site. I joined the site in 1992. I joined the project in 1992 and continued after that point. And eventually, the material and findings and experiences that we had led to the publication of a book on Sijilmasa entitled The Last Civilized Place, Sijilmasa and Its Saharan Destiny, published by the University of Texas Press in 2015. And I just want to add that this is a book which seems to be leading a life of its own. It has interests the Ministry of Culture here, and we believe that it will be published soon in French here in Morocco. It won the award for the best book in North African Studies in 2016, of which we're very proud. And it is a tale of the dig and the history and the significance of the place.
And it's being translated into French, so it will become
It has been translated. Now we're
here.
in the publication stage.
You are.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you, John.
But making it accessible is important, I would imagine, because you say that Sijilmasa, that people know about the idea of Sijilmasa. Would you say that people know now more about the reality of it? Is it a place that people visit? What is Sijilmasa? What is the significance of Sijilmasa in Morocco in 2020 and in 2019?
Well, as I mentioned, everyone knows the word. Everyone knows that somehow it's important in Moroccan history. What people don't know is it was a real living place, and its life extended over at least a millennium. The last refurbishment of the place was in the late 1700s by Sultan Moulay Abdallah, who re-roofed and rebuilt the Grand Mosque at the site, which is the only real standing structure, and it's simply the adobe walls that stand there today. It's very difficult to understand the site without explanation by those who actually work there. The site is, if I could go on into the nature of the site, it's something on the order of 3 kilometers long along the Westview, the river Z's, and it's just about 1 kilometer wide. So it's a kind of long, sinuous rectangle. Once again, we have a very good description of the site by El-Bekri in his cosmography, but that's the Sijilmasa of 1055, no later. At that very time, Sijilmasa was the object of conquest by the Almoravid movement. And so Sijilmasa first has a history of this separate dynasty that ruled over the region. And then that's the Midrarid period, the Midrar, the people who came in the way back from Iraq, from Mesopotamia, and then was conquered by the Almoravids. They had to conquer it twice. It's all a very interesting story. Before that, in the 900s AD, the Fatimids of Spain had attempted to conquer it and did for a little bit. And everybody knew that this was the place where gold was. But of course, they were the transitors. They were the conveyors of gold. There was no gold at the site. And the Almoravids expanded everything. They were the great builders. And they were followed by the Almohad, and they were followed by the Marinine, by the Wattasid, by the Alawi, who's, as often said in French, this is the berceau des Alawites. This is the cradle of the Alawites, because they came there in the 1200s by Sijilmasa people who went to the east, went on Hajj to the Hijaz, to Arabia, to look for people with holy qualities, with baraka and saintliness and learning. And they convinced them to come as teachers, as alim, to Sijilmasa, where they lived for decades and literally hundreds of years before they began to piece together the nature of modern Morocco in the period of the early 1600s and onward. So this is a very exciting place historically. What we have found in the site archaeologically is a kind of sandwich of Moroccan history. But the sandwich that's the earliest, the farthest down, the Midrarid period, is in many ways the most interesting because, well, it's all interesting, but the Midrarid had their own private kingdom, if you will. They organized the gold trade. How they did that, we really don't know. But we reached at the bottom level in a couple of our pits, we reached the Midrarid, and we know that they were Ibadi, as we would probably most likely call them today, of their own type. They're Sufri, not Sufi, but Sufri.
What's that?
Sect. It's a sect of the Ibadis, who are a sect of Islam, generally under the big cover, we would call it, of the Kharijite movement from the very earliest days of the righteous caliphates. So the original split in Islam was Sunni. Eventually, it took hundreds of years for Sunni to become known as Sunni and Shia become Shia. But there's also always the Ibadi or Khawarij. And of course, the remnant population, which is very vibrant, of the Ibadis in North Africa are in southern Tunisia, particularly on the island of Djerba, and inland from there, and then in the Mazab in Algeria, where the Ibadi faith continues. Ibadi
but around
procedures.
Around Sijilmasa?
No, nothing continued in Morocco largely because of the Almoravid expansion, which this was the first place, because of its wealth, because as you know, the Almoravids were Saharan people themselves. Where exactly they came from in their Ribat, we don't really know, but a lot of speculation, good informed speculation, has been done over many, many years by scholars, but they came out of the Sahara and they conquered Morocco, today's Morocco. They conquered all of the Maghreb. They conquered Al-Andalus. They changed the entire picture of the geopolitics of the Western Mediterranean. And of course, they were succeeded by the Almohads. Now, what's interesting at Sijilmasa is the mosque became our lab, because the mosque was rebuilt successively by the different dynasties. And this coheres with the way that the mosques were reoriented and rebuilt elsewhere in Morocco, throughout Morocco. And there's been good archaeology on this. So we know that Sijilmasa was very much a part of this dynastic evolution.
Yeah, so it became part of, beyond its commercial value, it retained a political and theological, is it too much to say a theological importance during a long period of its history?
Well, actually, this is an interesting question. There are two very important medieval Islamic archaeological sites right now that are being explored right now. One is Ahmat in the Ourika Valley near Marrakesh, and the other is Iglis in the Anti-Atlas Mountains. Iglis is the first Rabat, the first stronghold of the Almohad ruler Ibn Tumart. And that's a dig that has been expanding over time. It's really quite astounding, on top of a mountain. It's about 60 kilometers south of Taradat. And that's underway with our colleague Abdullah Fili, who's originally one of our students and now professor of history at the university in El Jadida, and very much a part of all of this program, as well as others.
Are you working on any of those?
I am not. As you know, John, I was the director of the Fulbright program here in Morocco after retiring from a career at Clemson University, and I had an administrative career over the last 10 years and consider myself retired. And
it seems like you're still following them very closely.
Retirement is a sometimes thing. And so...
Well, as I understand, you're here in Morocco on this visit to go back to Sijilmasa.
Yeah,
Tell us about
I am.
What the future of Sijilmasa.
Well, the future of Sijilmasa is one that I think the Ministry of Culture is taking in hand. A lot of sites right now of interest, and wondering how they can be open to the public. And Ron and I have written a paper on this recently, which will be presented at a conference on Sijilmasa. And we are very interested in ensuring that the public begins with the Moroccan public, especially with the Moroccan school children, who will learn of the significance of Sijilmasa, that it's older than Fez, that the independent dynasty, the Midrarid, were extremely important in their own way. And that is to say that it was their kingdom. It was the southern part of what is today Morocco was very much theirs, and they conducted this long distance trade with what we so glibly call Africa, connecting north and south. And I think that's of great significance for Moroccans and people generally in the world today, is that Morocco has had these long distance connections with Africa south of the Sahara. This was not only gold, but it was the major source of gold for the Mediterranean world for many hundreds of years. And gold from Sijilmasa has been found, for example, at Cluny in France, caches of gold coins, and as far east as Aqaba, at the head of the sea. And so Sijilmasa had influence far and wide. And we think of Sijilmasa as this city, perhaps at its apogee in the 1300s, reaching 20 or 30,000 people, which was large, very large. Consider the size of Venice or London at the time. We know that from medieval records that the fleets of caravan were enormous, hundreds and hundreds of camels with organizers and schedules. And it wasn't just gold. It was human beings. It was slaves. It was ivory. It was musk and feathers and ivory.
And pilgrims?
Oh, there was a two-way direction. Sijilmasa brought Islam to ancient Ghana. And yes, the first Islam in West Africa. Today's West Africa, what has traditionally been known as Sudan. We know that from medieval records. We know that the caravan trade was not just commerce. It was spiritual as well. And the production of, the transportation of spiritual leaders and holy books, the Holy Quran, went south and the gold came north. So this was a very important place, and it had worldwide reach. It was a global place in an earlier time, and that earlier time has many different stages. Each dynasty, the Moroccan dynasties, the Midrarid, they had their own characteristics, their own qualities. And so Sijilmasa was a place at the edge of the desert, so well located by the Midrarid in their own way of kind of shielding themselves from the rest of the Islamic world, protecting their separate nature, and developing this really fantastic trade across the desert.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a story that really, it's great that you and Ron have told the story, and it's wonderful that your book is being translated. But I liked what you said about the need for the story to especially be shared with Moroccan young people and Moroccan students, and why not West African young people and West African students, since it seems like it's their story too.
Absolutely, and I want to say that the exhibit at the Block Museum at Northwestern University called Caravans of Gold, which is just finished in Chicago, now moved to Toronto, and will move to the Museum of African History at the Smithsonian in Washington in the spring of 2020, encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about here. Not just Sijilmasa, it has brought together objects and scholars, and there's a wonderful catalog from Morocco, the other countries of Maghreb, America, and West Africa. And so you see that Africa, North and South, has a deep intertwined history. It's not, how should I say, it's not a Panavision history. is not wide and broad. It's narrow in its scope. It's all about this trade. And it's all about what the trade also brought with it, namely the religion, Islam. I think that's often neglected as a point of interest. And so if you look at countries to the south today, Senegal, Mali, so important in Islamic history, their Islamic origins are from here. That is to say, what is today Morocco. And that goes back to the earliest centuries of Islam. And it's a relationship that was cemented by that powerful dynasty, the Almoravids, reiterated in its own ideological fashion by the Almohad, decorated by Morocco's fabulous Marinid dynasty, a high aesthetic value, all of which is seen at the site in Sijilmasa.
And which continues today.
That's an archaeological site. You asked me, what is it like today? Well, it's covered with sand. And it's, we're talking about a place that is really the very edge of the good earth versus the Sahara Desert, which is so vast, so harsh, but is blessed with bountiful supplies of water. The work I did at the dig over those years is largely how the city supported itself. How did a city of 20 or 30,000 on the edge of the desert support itself and support this trade with thousands of camels and fleets across the desert? Well, the answer is dates. Ounce for ounce, the most nutritious food perhaps in the world. And Sijilmasa is the capital of the Tafilalt oasis, a word that, if we go back to Elizabethan times in English, Tafilalt was synonymous with the word date in London.
Really?
Yeah, they were exported. This is how Morocco was known, at least in Britain, was the land of dates.
Golden dates.
Yeah, and it's all so nicely interconnected over time. And Sijilmasa certainly has a role that in today's world, I would say, glorifies the Moroccan past. And it connects North and South and brings to light the kind of global life that existed in pre-modern times.
Well, thank you again. We really enjoyed talking with you and welcoming you back to Tangier. Come back soon.
Well, John,
enjoy your travels south.
Thank you. I'm going there later this week, going to Rissani. And it's a great pleasure to be once again here at the Tangier American Legation with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Maghrib in Past and Present podcasts. Other episodes are available on our website, www.themaghribpodcast.com, as well as on iTunes and Podbean.